Hey, everybody, this is Becky Gerose, and you are listening to Gorilla HR, the podcast. Thank you for tuning in and listening with me today. We are going to be talking a little bit about the market and what's happening in the world of finances and how to prepare and all of that good stuff. So, we're in kind of a crazy time. I think that really goes without saying right now. And there is just so much uncertainty, and there are a lot of questions that I, as an individual, have, not only for myself, but then also as a business owner. And so I think a lot about what's happening and what should we be doing, and should we be panicking or should we not be panicking? I don't know. And I don't have the answers to these things. Fortunately, today I have with me Justin Cooper, and Justin is a financial advisor. And so I'm going to tap into his expertise today, and hopefully he can maybe give me a little peace of mind. I know that's a lot to ask of somebody. But Justin, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Becky. This is awesome. Excited to be on the podcast with you today.
Yay. I know. I hit Justin up when I see him around town at different networking events, and I'm always like, "Oh, I've got some questions." So I thought instead of just me asking these things, we're going to bring him in and share his knowledge with all of you.
Yeah, very excited. Hopefully, to be a resource today, and excited to kind of share some of what's going on out in the market.
Yeah, well, let's start there. So we went from a period where markets were at an all-time high, and now markets are super low, and they have been for a while. So I guess the first question is, should I and everybody else who is invested in the market, should we be panicking? What do we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a natural response when we start to see a lot of red day after day, and it's a common response right now. It's phone calls I'm having every day with clients just to ease tensions. And the key is going to be really, what's your time horizon, what are your goals, and what's your risk tolerance. If we're someone that is a 20-year-old currently investing, then no, we're not really worried about this because we've got a long time horizon before retirement. We've got plenty of time to ride this roller coaster up until that point.
But what if you're not 20 and you're 46 and you would really like to retire sooner rather than later?
Exactly. So that was where I was going next, and thinking that if you're in your later, maybe we don't have as much time to go. We're in our 40s, 50s, maybe we've already retired. There's going to be more of the conversation of, well, should I diversify a little bit? Am I a little overweight? Maybe in the S&P 500 or other market indexes. So really, it could change. We've seen back-to-back years of just record highs with the S&P 500 finishing above 20%. 2022 was a bad year, but when we look ahead, I think there's a bullish outlook on the remainder of the year, but there's some uncertainty, right, with tariffs, with new administration change, with unemployment. So there are a couple different factors that are playing into that. But I think one positive is we got a good inflation report, so that was a positive. We got some good bounce back in the market with that. And if we take a look at the grand scheme of things, let's look at the big picture, right? Year to date, sure, the market is down about 6%, and when I say that, I mean the S&P 500. But if we look at 1 year out from now, so let's go back to March 20th, 2024, the market is still up about 7.5%. So a positive when we kind of zoom out just a little bit and let's look at the big picture of where we're at. A lot of folks, if they've been investing in high equities or whatever the case may be, there's a good chance you're probably still in the positive.
Yeah, I think that's good advice and good things to point out just from a timing standpoint. So if you're following day to day, you're going to see like highs and lows, and I think that's where some of the just fear comes into place. But it's making sure that we're looking over a longer period of time. I know with my husband and I go through these cycles where I'm like, I feel like we're doing really great and we've been saving, we're doing so good. And then other days I'm like, we're not going to have enough money, and so I freak out. So one of the things that my husband started doing years ago, and now I willfully engage, although at first I was like, I don't know about this. So we track, and monthly we kind of look and say, like, how are we doing, not just with our investments, but like the value of our home and like the value of our cars, even as that's going down because we're not getting new cars and all of these different things. So it's been helpful for me to take that lesson of looking over a longer period and each month kind of going in. And then I can look over the years and see how, even though there are some ups and downs as different things have happened, whether in our personal lives or from a market standpoint, I can see that over time the trend is positive. So that timeline I think is really important.
You're exactly right. And that's such an important practice to make sure we're doing like a net worth tracker, because how can I really improve anything if I don't track the data, right? If I want to lose weight, I track my calories or whatever the case may be. And so when we talk about your net worth, right, that's my assets versus my liabilities. That's what I owe versus what I own. And so putting in a spreadsheet and typing in, all of your account balances, your car values, your home value, any other thing that you have that may be an asset of value, and then compare that against what do you owe, your mortgage, your loans, any kind of credit card debt, whatever it may be, and then tracking that change over time to see, am I heading in the right direction? Because even though the market could cause really controlled anxiety, right? If we look at it every day, if I'm tracking my personal net worth every month, I can start to see, okay, great, I'm making small improvements every single month and growing in the right direction.
One of the things you just mentioned there was tracking assets, and that's another thing that I kinda struggle with, is so it's like, I know my home and cars, but then it's like, well, I have a tractor, and that's worth a couple $1,000. Like, where do you draw the line? Like, what are things that should be included versus, like, I don't have expensive clothes, like, I have shoes. So there's not like, "Oh, I don't have handbags or shoes," or like that's just not me, I don't have that stuff. So where do you draw the line on what to include in some of those assets?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you could probably get a little too in the weeds maybe. But having a general idea. So, for example, the way my wife and I personally do it is we'll track through, homes value, we'll track Kelly Blue Book on our cars and things like that. But as far as, do I own jewelry or clothes or bags or well, you name it, something that you put value on, right? Maybe you've got like a comic book collection. So the value of that could be, subjective to who would pay for it. So I would maybe find like a roundabout number. So when you talk about your tractor, okay, here's kind of what I feel like my tractor's worth at a reasonable value, and you could just use that number over and over, and that way you're not having to stress yourself out trying to search. What's my tractor worth? What's this handbag I bought worth? How about my hoodie from Walmart? Like what is that? What is that worth?
Right. Yeah, that's the hard part is like, and then my pantry's pretty full right now. Like I did just get a dozen eggs, so like, woo, am I
Oh,
rich?
you
Like,
might be
I've
doing
got like
well.
eggs in the fridge and toilet paper in the pantry. So
Yeah, yeah. People would be envious of you right now. You got toilet paper and eggs. Wow.
yeah, high roller over here.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and this kind of comes back to the planning phase. And so I recently had dinner with somebody who recently, I don't even know if she's officially divorced or not yet. So the question is really going to come down to like preparing for some of these big life changes, and how do you do that when you're kind of planning together. So I will say, and people kind of laugh. I don't know. Some people laugh at me. Some people are like, "Oh my god, that's so shady and suspect." But when my husband and I got married, and we've been married, we just celebrated 15 years of marriage.
Oh,
So like
congratulations.
I don't have any plans of him or me going anywhere, but I always say that like every day I wake up in this marriage, like I choose to be here, and that if I felt like I didn't want to be, I wouldn't be. And so when we first got married, we both had separate bank accounts. And so we have lots of combined accounts now, but I still have an account, and I call it my getaway fund. And when I say getaway fund, I mean like something's gone wrong and like my amazing husband for some reason is not amazing. And like if I need to be out, I'm going to be out. Like I have set myself up to make sure that if I need to, I can take care of myself. Like it wouldn't take care of me forever by any stretch of the imagination, but like I want to make sure that my needs are going to be met no matter what that situation is. So that is a long-winded way to come around to how do you plan for a life together when you don't really know what life is going to bring, whether that's a divorce or a death or I don't know, God forbid something happens and you have to bring like your niece or your grandchild or somebody else into your home. Like how do you account for those kinds of things?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's amazing, like how well prepared you are, maybe planning ahead for that. I don't know, maybe that's good or bad.
Some people say getaway fun, like, "You mean for vacation?" I'm like, "No, in case I need to bust out of this marriage."
Yeah, that's my go bag, right? Time to go. That's very funny. I think there's a lot of ways to do it, right? So, let's talk maybe from one example of if you're getting married, right, and you want to do separate finances or even joint finances, communication is going to be the best answer to that solution and knowing how do we want to work with money? How do I view money? How do you view money? How did you grow up with money? How did I grow up with money? And learning that about one another because that's going to help give you a baseline of how your spouse thinks about finances. And statistically, right, someone in the household is going to be a saver, someone's going to be a spender. All my clients, it's almost that way. I've got one spouse that is the one who focuses on their finances and they're on top of it and they're in the know. And the other one is like, oh, this is so great. Look at the weather. They're not paying any attention to it because they don't want to stress about it. And so communication is key inside of that, but then also planning and preparing for. I don't think necessarily, I think if you have a plan B, right, then you have a plan to leave. That is your plan. That sometimes I've heard that advice that if you make that play, you make that play available, it will come eventually. So, not saying anything about you at all, but for folks who might plan an exit, just want to say that, like you said, choosing to be in the marriage is important. Choosing to be in that relationship is important, and then choosing to make it work, right, through hard or through easy, good times and bad. When we look at planning, a lot of times we'll go through how do we want to establish who gets what. If we've got blended families, that's another huge topic, right? When we have folks who maybe get married later in life, what do beneficiaries look like? What's your will look like? How are we updating any of that information so that it matches? And then we put that plan in place in our software so that way I'm aware of what's going on. We've got copies of what they want written down and signed. They've got copies of their will with their estate attorney. And so we've got multiple people who are aware of kind of what's going on in case of a death, or in case of, let's say a medical emergency. Do we have POAs established so that we can take care of each other? That's huge. We call that like the core four sometimes. So having wills, a general power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and then a DNR. Whether you do or do not want to be resuscitated, that's up to you. But get that stuff written down. Don't leave it up to chance that it may or may not happen, because we all know that things happen by surprise. So preparation, communication, those are key.
Yeah, you're giving me things to think about. So from the communication standpoint, I think that Craig and I do that really well, which will hopefully allow us to continue to be married forever. But yeah, thinking back about it, we definitely talked about those things. How did we enter the marriage financially, and what did we want that to look like? And I know other friends and family who have totally, they have it set up in different ways, and everybody has their own thing that works for them. So I didn't even think about it, but yes, I would say check. We did that part. We did good with that. But then onto some of these other things of like, what do you want to happen should these situations occur? Some of that I'm prepared for, but some of it I'm not. And I imagine a lot of people aren't.
Yeah. It's a common situation where a lot of times we run into that with like, hey, what happens if husband gets hit by a bus? And I don't know why I use the bus analogy a lot. When's the last time you saw like a bus running around here? But it could, I guess, maybe it's coming with all the future planning they're doing. But of course, if something traumatic happens, we start to talk about protection and preparing for the unexpected. That's that conversation of what goes where, but then also life insurance, right? How do I care for my spouse if I've got one working person in the home, and maybe we've got a spouse that stays home with kids? Do we have insurance protection for that against something were to happen? Because if you were to pass, does your spouse now have to go back to work? Are they going to be able to keep the home? Are they going to have to move in with family? So running through a financial analysis of your needs, your wants, your wishes, and coming up with an accurate solution that's going to accurately really fund what the goals are. So that gives you a little bit of control from the grave. I know I'm talking more about a spouse passing than divorces, but in divorce there, it can be messy, and there can be opportunities, or really not opportunities, but challenges that happen with splitting of funds, divorce decrees, and how does that apply to your finances. So we want to get into that and have if that situation arises, knowing that you've got a resource. That's why it's crucial to have an advisor by your side.
And you probably can't give me an honest answer, but I'm going to ask the question. So, does it annoy you? Let's say, I know you have like your secret big computers in the sky. I'll say. So, if somebody's like, "Well, what if we think we need $10,000 a month in retirement? Well, could we see what that looks like if we need 15,000? Well, what if we retire at 60? Well, what if we retire at 61?" Like, as an advisor working with people, how many of these like what ifs and scenarios are reasonable to want to see before it's like, all right, settle down. Let's talk about what we really think is going to happen.
Yeah, that's funny, and it's great because that's my favorite part of this job. I mean, honestly, working with folks, and I like to tell folks to dream big. And so when we go through our first really sit down and we get the plan together, after we've met, after we've discussed, a little bit about how we work together with clients, when we're talking about, we've identified current assets and maybe our job and what we're doing. The next part of that is, okay, let's plan. What are our goals? When do we want to retire? Where do we want to retire? Do we want to move? Do we want to travel? Do we want to give? Do we want to be good stewards with our money? Do we want to tithe more? Do we want to help the community? There's just so many options you can do. Do you want to pay for college, pay for a wedding? So when we do that, I'll sit down with clients, let's say John and Jane Doe, and say, what's next when we hit this? We want to retire at this age. Okay, great. At our current financial situation, can we achieve that? Maybe, maybe not. But I like to put it all down. I want their dream retirement age, their dream retirement location, and their dream retirement activities. And so then we go through that. We put it all on the board. We talk about everything together, and we start to kind of peel back after that. So it's good because then they can have a realization of, am I dreaming or is this achievable? Because I've had it both ways. I've had folks that I'm like, hey, nothing you said is going to work. And then I've had all other folks that we sit down and we say, hey, you can do all that and more. We've got money that we'll never touch, which is a huge blessing when you've done that.
I definitely, prefer the school of, "Yes, you can do that and more," versus the, like, "Yeah, that's a nice thought. Let's come up with plan, B, C, and D."
That's right. And so when we have those conversations, right, when we run into a shortfall, the easy answer is like, hey, do you want to say, double your income or save more, right? And a lot of times they're going to say, well, I'll just save more, right? I can cut expenses a lot more than maybe doubling my income. A lot of folks, are just worker, they're in a job, they're in a career that they're working at and they're passionate about, and they may be really, really good at that job, but they don't know a ton about how do I save my finances appropriately or where do I put my assets to get the best growth. And that's where we come in and work side by side with them.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of it. So from I think on the employment side, I know one of the things that I have been telling a lot of my clients when they're, talking about different things that they could do outside of the comp space, because of course the comp space is, really where I focus with a lot of my clients. But for a lot of them, that's also some of the other things that you can do are around financial education, because the things that you're talking about are exactly the things that their people don't know how to do. And so employers may have some kind of retirement in place, whether that's a 401k or some other kind of structured plan, but they might have something. But then if their people don't really understand what it is or how to utilize it and what they can adjust, and they're not meeting with an advisor, they're missing out.
Yeah, you're exactly right. If you don't have that plan in place and you don't know, if you're just going to rely, that's how, I would venture to say probably upwards of 80% or more, maybe closer to 90% of people working are just going to retire on their 401k. They're going to retire and rely on that 401k to carry them through. And they may not know that $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 may not fund a realistic retirement. They may not be able to achieve those dreams, and so if they haven't done the early preparation or met with an advisor or done some planning on their own to kind of see what their ideal lifestyle looks like, then they may wind up in a shortfall, and that's a tough conversation to have. But it's all the more benefit the earlier you start, the more of a benefit it is because we can act faster, right? When you're 60 and 70 and we're talking about, hey, how do I retire with a certain dollar amount? It can be a hard conversation to look at those folks and say, hey, I'm sorry, we really can't afford that right now based on what you've done.
I hope that lottery ticket is a winner, or please continue to enjoy your day working.
Exactly, exactly. And you mentioned about like, retirement rates of, hey, we recommend a lot of times a 4%. You hear that in the market a ton, or in the industry a lot is a 4% withdrawal rate in line with social security or other pensions or whatever the case may be. And so when you start to tip up more closer to the 8 and 10 and 12% withdrawal rates, we're going to drain that account a lot faster. And so I've had that conversation with folks about, hey, if you want that certain amount of money and you need that certain amount of money, I can do that, but you're going to go back to work at 77. And so that kind of will open eyes a little bit and say, well, maybe I don't have to have that much money. It's funny how it works out when you throw those numbers out. People have all kinds of solutions all of a sudden.
What I think is so challenging though is, for myself, I love to travel and go on vacation. Like everybody knows, I always tell them I have like the three things that I'm working towards. So in my comp work, one thing at my kind of higher goal is that I want to move the needle on pay equity. Like I want to close the wage gap. I want people to understand why it's important to be equitable in their pay decisions. I want to fund my retirement and I want to go on vacation. Like those are my three. And this may change. Like next year, I may say something totally different, but like I know that those are things that matter to me. But thinking about the travel and the retirement piece, I don't know how to balance. How do I age and have retirement? But I want to be physically able to do the things I want to do too. So it's like, how do you plan for that? I want to make sure I have the money I need to live, but I don't want to die with a big old pool of money and I didn't get to go see something fantastic.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's, really the topic of discussion we use a lot is, hey, let's find your rich. What's important to you? Is it family time? Is it travel time? Is it new homes? And then with clients, we want to help them not only build up this, bucket of wealth or nest egg that they can live off of, but we want them to live rich too, right? They've now worked very, very hard. They've saved very, very hard. And we have folks that in that situation, they still will just have a pool of money and they're still living very frugally. And I'll kind of encourage them like, hey, you've worked really hard. You deserve to spend some of this money and we're not going to run out, right? We can do the math on this and we can know that, if you do X, we still are going to have funds available. So you can take that vacation. But you mentioned also being able to physically do those things. We start to think about, right, what does care look like? So long-term care is an extreme expense. And I mean, it just eats up retirement savings. And we may do all this planning and then we have a healthcare event or something that happens to us. And then we aren't properly prepared or covered in that situation. And even with long-term care insurance, it's not maybe the total answer, but it's a huge solution when it comes to helping out, maybe bridge the gap between what is it going to cost to have that kind of care versus allowing just government care where I may have a roommate that doesn't wear clothes. Right? Do I want my own private room, or do I want to get put where they tell me?
Yeah, I think the long-term care is really an interesting one. I know years ago I worked for a company and I was like early 20s and they offered as a supplemental benefit long-term care coverage. And at the time I'm like, what is this? Like I hadn't even heard of it. And this, was quite some time ago. And now I don't know if it's because I'm older or it's becoming more widely offered. I think that that long-term care coverage really, there's a lot of great perks to that.
The long-term care coverage, especially if your employer is going to offer it to you for pennies on the dollar versus what a private policy would cost, it's going to be an extreme benefit to you to take that advantage. If you're 20 and 30 years old listening to this podcast, you're probably thinking the same thing, right? Like, why in the world do I need long-term care coverage, or why do I need accidental death and disability, right? Like, but those things are huge because accidents happen, right? Things happen, and later in life, if you've worked at a company for a while and you can use that benefit and have them pay for it, man, that's a huge win.
My mom would always say, "Accidents are accidents for a reason, that's why we don't call them on purposes," and I'm like, "Yeah, okay,
Oh
that's
yeah,
true."
I love that.
I wanna come back one of the things that you said that I thought was really important is what's your rich? Like, what does a rich life look like to you? Because I think, when I hear financial advisor, and certainly it is having the funds to do the things that you need or the care that you need, but there's a lot more to it than that. So it really is what is fulfilling for you and what is the cost of your time? What do you wanna be doing with that? So I think that that's a really great place to start.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of our founders wrote a poem that is just amazing. I actually have a picture of it hanging on my wall in here. And he writes, I'm the richest man in the world. I've got a wife that loves me. I've got a home I live in. I've got horses. I've got dogs that love me to death. And that, I mean, he was probably insanely rich guy financially, but knowing what are your values, what makes you rich outside of more than just money.
I guess I need to say that part of my rich is, being in an amazing, loving relationship with my husband, and that getaway fund is only there in a true, really wild emergency situation.
There you go. Now we're going back and covering bases, right?
Yeah, so, like, when he goes back and listens, I don't want him to know, like, I'm planning for anything, no.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so flipping gears to the younger generation. So back again when I first got into HR and I would be doing enrollments when we had new hires and I would be processing people's changes for 401k contributions and things like that. So I had visibility into what people were doing. Whereas now everything is really removed. So like as I got further in my career, it's like, here's the website, you're responsible, you go do this stuff. And so when I had that visibility, I always made the plug just because it was instilled in me in the way that I was raised and grew up. Like, hey, you just got a 4% increase. Like, why don't you put one more percent into your 401k? And this would be like, just young me is like, hey, like, you're not even going to miss the money because you never had it. So I had visibility to that. Whereas now employers, I don't think have that same kind of visibility. So I think the education has to come in a different way. So, what is your advice, or what do you recommend to encourage people who are maybe coming into their first job? And maybe it's the first situation where they have something from an employer. Like, what do they need to do, and how can we help encourage them to save?
Yeah, that is incredible. And the younger you are, if you're listening and you want to get started, this is a great place to be right here. Is if you've never done a budget, create a budget. And that's writing down what you're going to bring in as income and then writing out everything you're going to spend in the month. Because if you don't, you won't have any idea where your money is going. And so we want to know, what is my income and what's my capability. So what is my rent? What is my cost for insurance? What's my gas and groceries? And then that gives me a number of what's left that I can save, and then automate that savings. If you can automate it and not think about it and have to make a conscious decision over and over again that I got to go put this in and make a, old school mindset would be, I want to write a check and know that I sent this money out. But if in the front end of that, if you can automate what's going to go into your 401k and set it to increase 1% every year, if you can get your employer match at a minimum, if your employer offers a 3, 4, 5% match, make sure you're hitting that match at a minimum, because that's free money on the table if you don't take it. And then from there, automate savings into an emergency fund. Build yourself up a 3, 6, 9 month emergency fund. Put that in a high yield savings account so that you're getting a great rate off of it. Make sure that it's liquid and you can get access to it. From there, if you've still got money left over, let's fund a Roth IRA. And if we're not above the income limits, start getting that after tax savings and fuel that bucket. If we've maxed out our Roth IRA, let's go back and max out our 401k. And so there, you can see how there's almost steps that you want to follow as you begin to start out your financial journey. But again, like you mentioned, if I get a raise, like a 4% raise or 3% raise, don't let lifestyle creep catch up with you. And so just because you got that raise, continue to live at what you're currently at. Don't raise your means just because you started earning more.
Yeah, the more you have, the more you spend.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so that's where that automation comes in, right? If I've got it and I got a raise like that, go ahead and just go into your 401k and bump it up 2 or 3%. Match that with your raise. And then you'll continue to get the same pay and you live as you've lived, but now you're saving even more. And that's only going to help you 10, 20, 30, and 40 years down the road.
I think it's so hard for some folks, whether it's because they're young and they're new, or they're just in positions where the cost of living has so far outpaced the cost of labor that, they're really like scrapping to make ends meet. But I think that's where like really talking about like the time value of money and seeing that over time, that little bit of savings today really will make a difference down the road.
You're exactly right, and I don't wanna discredit that. I mean, things cost a lot more today. We mentioned eggs a minute ago, my goodness. But, if you're new starting out, it probably does seem like, this is unattainable or this is unachievable with, where you're starting out with your current salary versus what the cost of life is. And so the answer to that is gonna be, again, doing a budget. Create your budget, track it every month, and because that's going to give you control and power over your money. Even when things are tight, if I can write out and see where my money's going, I can make conscious decisions maybe to cut subscriptions or cut out things I don't need at this time, right? I'm not saying you don't ever have to have a Disney Plus, subscription or ever watch Netflix again.
Right. Right.
But maybe if I can cut 20 bucks a month and that helps me pay for gas to get to work, that might help, right? So do that and make wise decisions of where your money needs to go. And then as you then get more comfortable in that lifestyle, you can add back those luxuries like that you want to go out to eat maybe a little bit more. Maybe you want to have a Hulu, Netflix, team. I don't know all the different subscriptions you can have.
Yeah, picking and choosing. So if you're a homebody and you wanna have all these choices, that's fine, but recognize that means, like, okay, maybe you gotta DoorDash one time less per week or month or whatever it
That's
is.
right. Yeah, because remember, every yes to one thing is a no to something else, right? So if I'm saying yes to door dashing and eating out every day, right, I'm saying no to 30 years down the road for me savings a little bit. And that sounds weird, right? It's hard to put that picture in your mind, but it's very true, right? Even in anything you do, right, with your family. If I say yes to work, I'm saying no to my family. If I say yes to one thing, I'm saying no to my friends. So find the balance and really write down that information and track it because it's going to help you after about 2 to 3 months you'll really get a good grasp of where you stand.
So I'm going to summarize, I think, what I've gotten from our conversation. So first off is really thinking about the question of what is your rich? So what is that you're working towards? So that can be in your current life as well as in retirement. And then it's figuring out, are you taking the steps and doing the plan to get there and backing that up one step further, which is going to be to budget and say, in order to do the things that I want that create that richness for me now, where am I allocating my resources for present use versus saving so that I have them in the future, and really thinking about that, you know, not just today, not making decisions that are just for today, but really making those decisions for ultimately the length of your life.
That's correct. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, making those long-term decisions is only going to help benefit you more and more. And we're happy to help with that. Any advisor in your area is going to be helpful in that. I mean, you can find folks, no matter what age you are, who are willing to help you through this. And even there's other folks maybe that you work with. Find some folks who maybe have been there a little bit longer than you that you know are maybe good with money, and ask them to help you. If you've never made a budget, Google how to make one. There's 100,000 resources outside online to do that.
So this will be my last question. So one of the things you just said too is like there are people out there who can help, and there are advisors. So if you've got somebody who's new and they're like, all right, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't really know how to go about this. What are the things that people should be asking when they are looking for an advisor to help them through this process?
So whenever you're looking to meet with an advisor, find someone that you can relate with. It's funny when I first started out in my 20s and I wanted to find an advisor, I was Googling different folks around my area as financial advisors. And a lot of them have bios online. And so I tried to find someone who had an actual custom biography online and I read more about them. And I saw that, hey, they went to the same school I went to, or they like the things I like. And then have meetings with those folks. Don't be afraid to interview people. Go and meet with them, have conversations with them, see that you're comfortable with them and you can trust them because ultimately they're going to be responsible for managing your future. All right. If you're going to give them the money to invest, you need to track it and make sure that it's doing what you want, but also that you can trust that person to act as a fiduciary on your behalf, to make wise decisions, and to stay within guidelines of a portfolio you want to build. Find out how they get paid. Ask good questions about how they're going to make money on what you're giving them, because you don't want to you don't want to get taken behind the woodshed and realize like, hey, I've been just pretty much paying this person's mortgage and I have nothing to show for it, right?
Yeah. I love it. That is great advice. Throughout, really great advice from the planning process to helping find somebody to help you understand all of that. So, Justin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on today and chatting with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite, Becky. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Gorilla HR podcast. I hope you took away some good tidbits today about retirement and budgeting and planning for the future. And it all starts with asking yourself, what's your rich?
That's it for this episode of the Gorilla HR podcast. We hope you found some unconventional wisdom and actionable advice to help you in your own HR journey. Remember, we're all working together to build better workplaces. Want to join in the conversation? Send us your questions, stories, and maybe even your own guerrilla tactics to podcast@gorilla-hr.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and share with your network. Until next time.